I became aware of you online and thought, oh, look, there's a sensible voice. There's a voice. There's a voice I can listen to. He thinks like I do. Of left and right, broadly speaking. That's gone. I think we now live in a world of truth and lies.
Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. This is part 2 of our interview with Neil Oliver, archaeologist, historian, and political pundit extraordinaire. This has been a fascinating interview. I hope you've enjoyed it up till now. This is the only time we've done a 2-parter interview on Stand on Guard, and I hope you're enjoying it so far. The best may be yet to come. It's been fantastic up till now, and we've got more great information with Neil Oliver. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. So let's continue with that interview right now. Somebody I would never, in a previous life, really had much in common with.
Yeah.
But because of the pandemic, and because both of us have realized the most important things are freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the basic freedom to speak our own minds, that those things are suddenly more important than anything else. Those are the issues that matter.
You talk about, you talk now with Naomi Wolf. I haven't spoken directly to Naomi Wolf, but I listened to her. She's another of the voices to whom I listen. If you had told me 5 years ago that I would find so much common ground with George Galloway, when I was a student at Glasgow University in the 80s, George Galloway was my constituency MP actually for Labour, and I just thought he's political. All of his opinions were just anathema to me at the time. And now that I find that every other word that comes out of his mouth, I'm going, yes, that's what I think as well. And so, and I'll tell you what it is that it's that we used to live in a world of left and right, broadly speaking. That's gone. I think we now live in a world of truth and lies. Now, I listen, Naomi Wolf. Now, no one does, because no one has the wisdom of Solomon to only know and speak the truth. But you can tell when people are speaking sincerely. They're not working off a script, and maybe they've got the wrong end of the stick, but they are speaking sincerely. But there's a lot of truth there, and you feel the truth. When someone, I listened a lot, not so much, not to the same extent, but I used to listen a great deal to Jordan Peterson. And he would articulate things, he would put things, he would say things, and I would be so impressed by what he had said. But what I realized was that he was saying things that I already knew, and he was just articulating them. And that the physiological, almost physical pleasure of hearing someone put into words something that you had subconsciously known to be true, and then they kind of conjure it into being right in front of your eyes, and you think, yes, that's right. And the truth is like that. And so we're hearing the truth from people, you and I, we're listening to people that hitherto we would not have paid any attention to, but it's because they speak the truth. They're not lying. They're telling the truth. And it's profound. The old divisions, people that I might have dismissed out of hand because they were of the left, let's say, or far less of the right, and I might not have listened to them. I don't care if they're right or left or halfway in between. Do you seem to be telling the truth? And that's really, that's really what moves me. You said about the Canadian truckers, that was intense. Here for us, there was a small contingent, a relatively small contingent of us that had latched onto it and saw the injustice of it very early on, and by extension, we made the connection that things were happening to small, hitherto democratic populations that had so much DNA in common. So it's happening in Australia, it was happening in New Zealand. It was happening in Canada. God, I've got family in Canada, and I've always imagined Canada to just be a kind of a USA without the madness. It was just it was a peaceful, easygooing, honest place, and suddenly it was run by these draconian individuals that they were like you couldn't make it up. You couldn't have written it for fiction, and they were characterizing the truckers as Nazis. the farmers in the Netherlands and in Germany and in Greece, they're being called far right extremists. Farmers, the most naturally conservative species on the planet. And at the same time, in Canada, you had a real life Nazi getting a standing ovation in Parliament with your Prime Minister Trudeau and Zelensky clapping this guy that fought Russia. That fought the Russians in World War II, and he was being celebrated for that. And you think, and at the same time, you're characterising guys that just want to deliver food back and forth across the border. You're calling them Nazis. This is the most absurd sequence of events. I'll never go back. In Rebecca, the Du Maurier thing, last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again, but I can never go back. Or we talked about the First World War.
I know that.
And the First World War has been described as a set of iron railings that separate the world of before from everything that happened since. You could still see that Edwardian world, but you could never get back there. It was out of reach. You could reach through the railings, but you were never going back there. And what's happened to me, many people recently, is that the way in which I perceived the world and I understood the establishment and the way I thought the clockwork mechanism, it's all gone for me now. And I'll never go back. I am now living in a new perception of reality.
I don't think I've ever had it put that simply, succinctly, but accurately as saying it's not left or right, it's truth versus lies. Now, that's what this is all about. I think you've helped me explain what's happened to me. And because that's what I latch on to now. If somebody is not giving me talking points, is not reading from a prepared script as Justin Trudeau does every day in his entire cabinet, reading from a script that is increasingly sounds like a pack of lies and lunacy, I want to listen to that person because they're giving me something of themselves. And, tomorrow is actually the second anniversary of Justin Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act. He did it on Valentine's Day. I mean, is that ironic or not? Valentine's Day.
Quasi sinister.
Yeah. And of course, that was that event, that incident continues to reverberate in Canadian politics. That we had a prime minister who had the gall and as you said, the wickedness to bring the full force of the state down upon a bunch of peaceful protesters in Ottawa after the problems of the border had been solved. There was no impetus to invoke the Emergencies Act as a result of the border issues. They'd already been solved. It was entirely aimed at these people in Ottawa and these bureaucrats and these downtown dwellers who just didn't like these people in their neighborhood, and these politicians who really saw them as a threat to their power wanted to destroy them, and they still do. And I've continued to attend the trial of Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, who were identified as the ringleaders of this entirely organic movement. There was no organization. It had the organization of a pub crawl. I'll put it that way, because I was there, and if there was a news conference, you never knew about it till it was 10 minutes into the news conference. So there was no organization. This was an organic movement, and I'm proud to be associated with it as a real journalist who was there talking to real people.
Absolutely.
CBC sat in their offices on Sussex and Bank Street and talked to each other about how horrible this was, that these truckers were in town, these great unwashed truckers. And it was, to me, just absolutely outrageous. But
yeah, there was something terribly. Oh no, carry on. Sorry. No, I was just going to say there was something agonizing, painful about watching those groups upon whom the worst of it was visited. And did it start? It possibly did start there with the Canadian truckers, because you could see. I mean, it's Canada. A law-abiding, rules-based, a relatively small population in a vast and wondrous landscape, and all of the rest of it. and that this was being visited upon the truckers in that. And then likewise, I mean, I've spent a lot of time working in Australia and in New Zealand, and I've got friends there, people I love, and that society was being traduced in that way by those dictatorial, authoritarian regimes in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada. You know, there was an exquisite wickedness about that. I mean, these are populations that, if any populations don't deserve to be treated in that way, it was them. And that seemed to be partly why they became the focus for the attention of people like Trudeau. The least deserving of that kind of mistreatment and deliberate misunderstanding and defamation. There was something particularly wicked about that. But you were going to ask me a question there.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on this. Thankfully the clock isn't going to run out in 5 minutes, but I know your time is precious. And I wanted to touch on the Online Safety Act. This is another one of those great ideas that you talked about that all of these democratic countries are coming up with at the same time. Just like no influence here. Nobody's telling us to do it. But in the United States, they're talking about the Restrict Act. In Great Britain, you have the Online Safety Act. The European Union has the Digital Services Act. Australia has got the Online Safety. And the amazing thing here is that not only are these pieces of legislation identical in content, they're even calling them the same thing. And Trudeau has already had 2 pieces of internet censorship legislation pass, Bill C-11 and C-18. And the third one is coming. And I've been talking about this now for the last year because I found it in the archives of the last Liberal government that prorogued before the last election. It was this piece of legislation, the Online Safety Act, was on the table. It was about to be tabled as legislation, but Parliament closed for the summer. Election was called, and the bill died on the order table. It's still there though, and for the last 3-4 years now, the Liberal government has been conducting study groups on how to reintroduce it. And I've read all of the information is all on the website, the Heritage Canada website. And incredibly, is quite honest about what this bill is going to be about. And essentially, it's going to outlaw disinformation, misinformation, and they just recently added malinformation, which I know you love to talk about that one. But they've added that term, and it's outlawed, but they don't define what these terms mean. So there's no legal basis for banning it because they refuse to define it, meaning the government will decide what those 3 terms mean. And so David Crayden going on the air to talk about Justin Trudeau could be disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation because Justin Trudeau doesn't like it. And he refuses to define what those terms are. So I think this is perhaps one of the most worrisome things to affect our democracies is that the government is going to decide what truth is and what propaganda is. And it's never them, of course, but it's new media and it's independent media. Have you had to grapple with the Online Safety Act in the UK at all?
Well, there feels like an inevitability about it. That it's, it comes down to whether they have the nerve to do it. I have my doubts about the presence of backbone in these characters of the kakistocracy. I think a lot of it is brinkmanship, and that as long as people face them down, are prepared to face them down, they will back down because there's a spinelessness about them. They're playing, it's game playing to some extent, and reality is something they don't want to contemplate. It's clearly, I worked in the internet very early on in another iteration of my working life. I was part of the team that looked after the third website in Britain in the mid-1990s. It was British Telecom's BT.com. At that time in Britain, there was only, I think it was Tesco Supermarket and the Royal Bank of Scotland each had a website, and we were the third. It's hard to imagine that, but it was about 1993, 1994, and we were developing that. So it was, I was contemplating the internet very early on, and and because I've always had my eye on it, it's clear to me that the internet has become a double-edged sword. You know, it was the American military that paid for it. DARPA, the DARPA net was how it was originally there, and it was really there so that in the event of a nuclear event, the computers would still be able to speak to one another. That was all they were concerned about doing, and so they employed all these characters in MIT and so on to come up with the tech that would enable it. And what happened clearly was a Wild West that has prevailed almost to this day, where anyone can put anything out there onto the internet. And for the very first time really in human history, millions of us, if not billions of us, have had access to information in real time. And a lot of it is the sort of information that in 50 years ago, when everyone was just dependent on a radio broadcast, the 9 o'clock news on the television and the newspapers, which, as it turns out, were all pretty much controlled and partisan then anyway, that it was relatively easy. Unless someone was a particularly dogged researcher, it was pretty easy to take for granted that most people didn't have a clue what was going on. But the internet changed all of that. And now anyone like me, you, anyone else that's interested and motivated can access all the information on the planet, read all the papers, read all the documents, look at all the academic research. And clearly the powers that be have realized, well, I can't have this. These people are informing themselves. And then once they've informed each other accurately, they're sharing the information and they're actually spreading the truth. We can't have the unalloyed truth circulating freely in the general population. And that's why they're seeking to characterize some of it as malinformation, which is information that, while they freely concede that it's correct, it's inconvenient to the state narrative. And that becomes the justification for censoring it. It's not that it's wrong. It's not that it's inaccurate or false. It's that it doesn't help the government get its way, so it has to be censored. And so they always. I thought years ago, God, they're going. What, this internet thing? It's free. Nobody pays for it. It's just out there. It's millions and millions of documents. How can this possibly be? They even give you the software with which to interrogate this Solomon's mine of information. How can this be? Well, it turns out that 30 years later, it can't be. And so Internet 2.0 is going to be something that the powers that be control. But the extent to which they follow through with that will be very interesting to watch, because for the first time we are all watching them, and too many of us are all clued up on what they're up to with online safety bills and all of the rest of it. We know it's just about stopping honest people educating themselves with accurate information. And for the first time in history, governments are going to have to come forward and say, yeah, we don't want you knowing the truth. That's where we are with the Online Safety Act. Governments are going to have to get up and stand behind podiums and say, we don't want you knowing the truth, because you get uppity then and you start drawing accurate conclusions and making demands of us, and we can't have that. Now, do they have the backbone to do that? I'm not sure.
Well, I sense there's some optimism in your words today. You think we're pushing back. The people are pushing back. That the government may not be able to get away with this. We're in a pivotal year, though. There's no question about that. There's one of the most incredible presidential elections in history is going to occur in November. Donald Trump still being targeted by the Democratic judiciary that wants him in jail. There's a demented president who insists upon running for a second term. And the United States seems to be on the verge of civil war, certainly over its open border crisis.
The number of times I spend my time watching things now with my chin on my chest, but it was another good one last week when even before the Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview had been aired, they trotted out Hillary Clinton to rubbish Tucker as a, whatever,
I
as a
saw that.
puppy dog and a useful idiot. And she actually said, I mean, the words actually came out of her mouth. She said that there was now an appetite in the United States for leaders that will imprison the opposition and destroy the press. And I thought, are you kidding? Your party has spent the last number of years trying to get Donald Trump into jail. And he is, without a doubt, the most popular politician in America. He's certainly your strongest opposition. And you're trying to jail him. And also via the various censorships that we've just been talking about in relation to the circulation of information, the way in which we know that, for example, the Hunter Biden laptop was suppressed. Now, that information was suppressed deliberately by the White House working in concert with Facebook and Google. That information genuinely circulated at that time would have had a material effect on the election. And so if suppressing that information wasn't interfering with an election, I don't know what is. But and Russiagate, the allegations that the Clintons made that Donald Trump was working with Russia in return for power, and that has been dismissed. That's false. That didn't happen. And yet she was there in advance of the Tucker Carlson Putin interview, saying for some reason there's a sort of fifth column element in the United States that wants leaders that will imprison their opposition and destroy the press. I thought, but that's what we're watching happen in the United States of America right before our eyes.
Yes. And she had the gall to call Tucker Carlson a useful idiot for Russia. And she's the one that invented the complete lie about this Russia collusion. It was a hoax, and she knew it was a hoax. And she has never apologized for that. She's never even affirmed that it was a hoax, even though everybody knows it was a hoax now. And yet I called her a useless idiot in a column because she has done nothing except divide Americans and try to put Americans in jail who disagree with her and continue those foreign wars. Because that's what she really is most afraid of, I believe, is that when Tucker Carlson goes and talks to Vladimir Putin, which is something apparently you can't do, we don't want to engage in dialogue here, that there's a possibility the war might end. And that seems to strike fear into the hearts of Democrats and Republicans alike who are part of the uniparty in the States who want this war to go on.
Because the military-industrial complex cannot contemplate peace. They can't have peace. Imagine an outbreak of peace. the existence of the military-industrial complex is predicated on forever war. It's a racket. We know this. It's a racket.
It is a racket, and I reread 1984. I actually did an oral audio book of it on my broadcast because I found it's a book that when you read it in the context of your time, you see, you hear different things from that book. It's quite amazing.
Yes.
It was almost like I was reading things in 1984 I'd never noticed before. And I especially was drawn to the parts about what Orwell described as the endless wars that were going to occur and why they were going to occur. And I thought, my God, we are living this right now, where we are constantly being told we got to fight these people, we got to keep this war going. And why? Because some people are getting rich off it.
I invoked that. I invoked that at the time of the Nazi in the Canadian Parliament, because he was being celebrated for having fought against Russia in World War II when Russia was our ally. And that immediately made me think of the way in which in 1984, the people are told, well, Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. But even though they knew that actually it had been the other way around before, they were at war with somebody else and at peace with someone else. But you memory hold that. You just forgot that you had ever known that. And I thought, are they actually, because we're at war with Russia, because NATO or because Ukraine is at war with Russia, are they seeking to sow the seeds in young people's minds that Russia's always been the enemy? even though history shows that in World War II, the Red Army was the ally. I thought, are they actually playing that game that Orwell describes in 1984, where you have to say the people that you're at war with now have always been the enemy? You can't allow for the possibility that people remember that there was a time when we were friends with these people.
No,
I don't know.
We were friends with these people when they were communists, and we can't be friends with them now that they're trying to do things differently. But it was frightening for me to watch that event, and I was actually the first Canadian reporter to get that story out. And there was a Jewish publication in the United States that was actually first to publish that story. And I went to them to confirm that somebody else was seeing what I was seeing in there, because the chief of defense staff, like the 4-star who leads the Canadian Armed Forces, was in attendance that day. And he was one of the first people to stand up and applaud. And I thought, our chief of defense staff doesn't seem to know that Canada was allied with Russia during the Second World War. I mean, I can understand Justin Trudeau not knowing that, because he's a very ignorant man who's done nothing in his life except drama, and he continues to do that as prime minister. But nobody there knew whose side we were on in the Second World War, and that if a Russian was fighting, if a Ukrainian was fighting the Russians, he was probably fighting for the Nazis. No, nobody there seemed to know that. And it was absolutely frightening. And as you said, it's like, we've always been at war with Russia now. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. And the funny thing is, of course, is that in both world wars, Canada and the UK were allied with Russia. In both world wars, we were on the same side.
And one of the great tragedies of our lifetimes, really, is, I would say, is that, and it's generally been swept under the carpet now, that when the Soviet Union collapsed post '89, for the first few years there was a reaching out by Russia and Russian people. Set aside the politicians, but there was an expectation by Russians that they would come in from the cold. After the Cold War, whatever, they would come in, they would come back, and they would come home to Europe. That they would be welcomed in, and they would become part of the family of Europe. And but all they got in front of them was a stiff arm and a hand saying, "No, you're not us. You're not coming in." And that opportunity was smothered. That was scotched in the egg is a terrible tragedy, because there was a time when that it could all have been so different, and yet,
yes.
and now here we are. Now here we are instead. We have NATO and Russia at daggers drawn, and it didn't need to be like that. There's historical links. It's Scotland, for example, and Britain, England, connection, the Muscovy Company. Trading links with Moscow going back into the Tudor period, and connections moving in both directions between places like Poland and Britain and Russia and Britain. There are family ties there that have been running back through centuries, but we're invited to think, oh no, Russia's always been bad. These people have always been baddies.
Yeah,
and it's such a disgrace that people have been made so ignorant about the reality of relationships. Right? The Romanov Tsars were related by blood to the British royal family through Victoria, and all of the rest of it. That was the First World War. It was cousins, Wilhelm, Nicholas II, and the British royal family. They were all cousins.
Yes, and George and Nicholas looked like brothers. They looked like twins at times.
And we're all invited to, oh no, we've always been at war with Russia. Excuse me, I don't think so.
Well, I certainly applauded Tucker Carlson for doing the interview. He's been criticized from both sides for not being tough enough, or being letting Russia go. It's clear the woke establishment did not want him to do that interview. I'm glad he said, "To hell with you." I hope he gets back into the United States, because there are people who want to bar him from re-entry. As insane as that is, but Vladimir Putin made that point in the interview, is that we were reaching out to you. You promised NATO would not expand eastward, and you violated that promise. under
Yes.
Clinton, under Bush. You did it. And now it's what, an absurd 31 nations belonging to this club? It is absolutely ridiculous. I served with NATO in Bosnia, and I spent my Christmas in 1996, Christmas dinner, at a mess hall in Tuzla, Bosnia. And I sat across the table from Russian special forces who were visiting the base. And it was a NATO exchange mission. There was still a high degree of friendliness between Russia and the United States at that time. And on my side were Green Berets, U.S. Special Forces. And I sat there, and they were trying to exchange anecdotes. The Russians understood English much better than the Americans understood Russian. So the Russians were doing their best to talk in their broken English and to share some stories. And I almost cried. I thought, isn't this wonderful? These people were trained to kill each other. These people were trained to kill each other, and they're sitting at the same table having Christmas dinner. And here's these Soviet troops talking about their Orthodox faith, which was alive again in Russia. They were allowed to be religious
Yeah.
again, and how
Mm-hmm.
much Christmas meant to them.
Yeah.
And I thought, my God, I hope we build on this into a better future. But of course, we have
It's
not
that.
done that. We've
It's
done
that.
the reverse.
You make me think of the Christmas Day peace in the First World
Ah,
War.
yeah.
Early on, when there was, when the men from some of the frontline positions, Allied, British and German, just came across and met, and swapped some chocolate and shared cups of coffee and whatever, and there was genuine panic in the back in high command, because we can't have these guys getting on. We've got to get them at each other's throats again. We can't have them recognizing one another as fellow human beings, because where might that lead? And you're made to think of that adage about wars. You, Old men send young men who don't know each other and don't hate each other to war with each other. And the old men on both sides do know each other. And when it's all over, they shake hands and split the winnings when all the young men are dead.
Yes.
That's all. It's a sinister wickedness that happens again and again and again when there's ever any possibility. Say post 1989, as you're describing there, when people, as people naturally are inclined to do, find common humanity with one another. There are other entities operating that think, well, we can't have that, because we need to keep these people hating. And that's what's being fomented all the time at the moment. Hate this person, hate that group, hate that religion, hate. It's all hate. And it's so transparent. And, and for as long as that goes on, well, you get what you get, which is, that's the kindling for forever war. But sometimes you have to pull back from it and think, wait a minute, why are we hating each other? Where does that come from, and where does it lead, and where does it get us? Where has it ever got us? And that's another thing that's out there with with the internet. That all of that information that's out there that enables people to learn, educate themselves, and nudge towards the truth of what's really going on, and cui bono, who benefits. The answers to those questions are freely available, unless and until the powers that be get a grip of the internet and they shut off that access to the truth.
Well, I never saw an American war I didn't support in my historically or otherwise. When I was in uniform or out of uniform, I supported every American war. I can't do that anymore. I look back and I see that I was being used as much as anybody. And what broke it for me was this mindless desire to start a nuclear war with Russia right now, and pouring billions of dollars into Ukraine, into a corrupt government, a clown of a president who thinks he's the reincarnation of Winston Churchill, wandering around the world in its combat fatigues with his arms outstretched. Give me another billion. so I can bring it back, and God knows where it goes. They're lining their pockets with it. You'd be a fool not to know that, not to
Mhm.
acknowledge that, and you'd be a fool not to know they've lost this war. It's over. But
Oh,
the it's so important to the people funding the American politicians to keep this war going as long as possible that they're willing to live with this illusion that
we've
this
just
is
had
somehow. Go ahead.
we've just had to sit through Rishi Sunak pledging support for Ukraine for 100 years or more. Those words actually came out of the serving Prime Minister's mouth, that we will support Ukraine for 100 years or more, committing the unearned tax pounds of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, keeping open the faucets that will pump money into that place, there to be laundered and back out into the vaults of whatever, Northrop
Hmm.
Grumman, Boeing, and the rest of them. It's just
I,
so transparent now, and we can see it. That's the problem that the enemy have. We can see it. It's blatant. It's not being hidden anymore. The mask is off. We can see the corruption. We're almost being invited to notice the corruption. I think sometimes to see, will we do anything about it? Well, you can see the corruption. What are you going to do about it? And what are we going to do about it? We have to say no.
well, you have a national election this year in the UK.
It's not been called yet, but everyone's expecting it
Expecting it.
in the first half of the year, May, June. We're all expecting it. There's obviously in the EU, they've got 9th of June. The member states have elections there, and the powers that be are very nervous about the blatant popularity of groups that they have the temerity to dismiss as populists or right wing or extremists. In 9 countries, so-called right-wing parties are expected to, wipe the boards, and in another 9 states, in addition to that, they're expected right-wing or extremist populist parties are expected to get second or third. It's everything's to play for at the moment.
You've got basically a uniparty, though, in the UK now, with the Conservatives sound like the Labour Party, and there's no real
They're
difference.
terrible. They're absolutely terrible, and no one stands for anything, David. They're all hollow. There's no one speaking with any kind of conviction. I mean, I listened to Putin talking to Tucker, and apart from anything, I mean, the fact that if you're interested or not, but he gave a 35-minute précis of Russian history for the last 1,000 years at the top of the conversation. And then, in the back end of the conversation, he was absolutely positioning himself as someone who cared about the Russian family, as he called it. That he talked about the Orthodox Church, the importance of that. He stressed that anyone, be they Mongolian, be they Chinese, be they whatever, they were all Russians together. It was all the Russian family. And I thought, when did we last hear a premier in the West speak, whether it was authentic or not? He nonetheless spoke of a sense of place and belonging. That he belonged somewhere. Now, you never get the sense that Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, the Conservative and Labour leaders respectively, have a sense of belonging anywhere. And and Joe Biden in the States and Justin Trudeau, they don't give the impression of being the loving sons of a motherland. That is not how they present themselves. And I thought, at least Vladimir Putin positioned himself as being embedded in Russia like an incisor in a jawbone. It's like, I'm going nowhere. This is my place. That Russia belongs to me. And you think, well, maybe it was a well-rehearsed routine, but it sounded convincing. And in stark contrast to Joe Biden, he was articulate and erudite.
Yes, it was in stark contrast. And I tell you, Justin Trudeau could not discuss Canadian history probably beyond 1970 with any conviction or any accuracy. And I was quite impressed. Yes, and even though it's been assaulted by so many people out there as being a false history of Russia.
I know,
Yeah,
but he did it.
right.
He was able to do it. He was able to deliver in that way, and he deliberately positioned himself in that way. And I don't see insincere or sincere or otherwise any of our politicians seeking to do similar. to describe love
No.
of country. They don't do it. Even whether they mean it or not, they don't even utter the words.
No, it is astounding. I can remember a Conservative Party led by Margaret Thatcher and a Labour Party led by Michael Foot or Neil Kinnock, and you knew at least they believed in something.
Yeah,
And they weren't
yeah.
reading talking points. But
The fun of I mean, when I talked about George Galloway, I mean, I can remember when when you watched people when you heard people speak. I mean, we didn't have cameras in the House of Commons back then, but when people deliver Tony Benn and people like Galloway and others, you didn't know what line they were going to take, because it was by no means certain that they would take a party line. There would have been maybe there was a party line coming down from the leadership of Labour or the leadership of Conservative, but there were characters, lots of them, ex-miners, people that came out of the pits, old soldiers and people, and when they got up on their hind legs, they were lying. You didn't know what they were going to say, because they were going to speak from here. They were going to speak from the heart.
yes.
And it might fly in the face of the leadership. You never get that now. Keir Starmer just trots out whatever's been delivered into his email as the product of the latest focus group, and Rishi Sunak does the same. What do we think the electorate want to hear me say today? Okay, I'll say that. It's pathetic in the extreme.
Well, I think that's one thing nobody can ever accuse you of, Neil, is
God
reading
help me.
from the script. And I have appreciated this interview so much. I'm a huge fan. My wife was a huge fan of your archaeology shows. She watched them faithfully and introduced me to them. She bought me your book for Christmas,
Lovely.
and she knew I'd love it, and I did. I just found it fascinating and easily the best ghost book out there. There's no question about it. And your thoughts are so incredibly poignant at times when you talk about your father's death and the effect it had on your writing the book, but so insightful as well. I really enjoyed the book. And my viewers are always commenting on your show, and when I'm on your show, they always say, we just love Neil Oliver. And some people have compared you to Braveheart, and I say, well, Neil is not a Scottish nationalist. Well, we don't mean that. We just mean he's for freedom. He wants to fight for freedom.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. And that's why I really, really admire this man, because he is a fighter, and we need fighters in this world. And I think of a line from Casablanca, one of my favorite films, where Victor Laszlo, the freedom fighter on the run from the Nazis, he's asked, "Why do you keep fighting?" And he said, "You might as well ask why we keep breathing. If we stop breathing, we will die. If we stop fighting, the world will die." And I think those words are still incredibly accurate today and relevant today. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I've never done an interview an hour and a half on this show, but I could do another hour and a half. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I just love your work.
Absolutely. And can I just say, to quote, Casablanca again, this could be the start of a beautiful friendship. I think you're one of the voices, as I said, that I became aware of. I don't know what I found you on a podcast, an interview somewhere, and I thought, this is another of those voices that I can listen to that speaks my language. I've been listening to you ever since. As I say, as you said, you've been a guest a couple of times on my GB News show, and I'll come back on here anytime you want, David, and continue this conversation about about any topics you want, because it's these conversations with people like yourself that are like the oxygenated blood that keeps my heart beating. So let's do
thank
it
you for saying
soon.
so. All right, thank you so much. You've been watching Neil Oliver, my guest today on Stand on Guard. Thank you for watching, and I hope this was enjoyable for you, all as it was for myself, and I hope for Neil too. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Hi, this is David Crayden from Crayden's Right and Stand on Guard. Join the resistance. Resolve to resist. Become a member of this station. I've been practicing journalism in one form or another for over 30 years. I've worked in print, radio, and television for a lot of prestigious publications and media outlets. I was an Armed Forces Public Affairs officer. I worked in Parliament Hill. I know how Ottawa works, and I know how corrupt federal government can be. But you can play a part in opposing Justin Trudeau's government and Justin Trudeau's plans for Canada. You can become a part of the Craydens' Right Resistance. Now, I urge you today, please support this station in any way you can. And ring that bell, subscribe, because that ensures you're at least going to continue to be able to watch these episodes. You'll beat the algorithm. But more importantly, I need your financial support. I hate to ask, but that's what I'm doing. I made a decision to pursue independent media because I believed it was the best possible route for me to take as a journalist and as a concerned citizen of Canada. So you can become a part of that. And at only $5, you can become a part of that on YouTube, on Substack, and with Buy Me a Coffee, a one-time donation. But I need your support. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. If you've already done that, if you're already supporting the station, thank you. But if you haven't, make that decision today.